Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us for the launch of our new report on London's packaging footprint. I'm Pauline Métivier. I'm the head of business and sector support for ReLondon, and very pleased to be your host today. We're very excited to be here. This event is part of Circular Economy Week that is kind of full of events about circular economy delivered, like particularly in London. So I hope you've been able to engage with the week so far and that you're enjoying it. This event is about the packaging footprint in London, and we are all very excited to share with you the key learnings of this new report and start the discussion about how London can lead the way in making our packaging system more sustainable. So we'll be together for the next hour. So the agenda for today is we're gonna start with presenting you the key results, key highlights of the report. Then we're going to hear from Nina from the Greater London Authority that will give that will give us their perspective on the report and what we're doing in London to make progress on how we consume and manage packaging. And then we're very excited to have a fantastic panel that will discuss what's next for our packaging system in London. They will bring view from local governments, from businesses, and from innovators in that space. Just a few kind of housekeeping general rules. So first, to say that the webinar is recorded and we will share the recording afterwards. Second, to say that the packaging MFA, the packaging report is already available on our website. We will share the link in the chat, so you can already have a look at it or share that with your colleagues or anyone that you think is going to be interested about it after the webinar. And the last bit, which is really important, so this webinar is really for you. So please don't hesitate to ask questions through the Q&A section. So if you want to ask a question, please do it through the Q&A section and ideally not in the chat. So we'll aim to answer your questions across the webinar as much as we can, but there are going to be also like 10 minutes at the end of the event where we will pick up all the questions that haven't been answered. So please put your questions in the Q&A section across the duration of this webinar. Great. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Maël, who's going to be leading this work for us at ReLondon and who has collaborated with Valpak and WRAP to deliver this report. Over to you, Maël.
Thank you, Pauline, and hello, everyone. So a bit of context on the project before we dive in the results. So this project is part of a broader work that ReLondon is conducting to better understand material flows in London and their impact on greenhouse gas emission in the city. So back in 2021, we published our first material flow analysis on food, and last year we published one on fashion. So this report and study is the third of the series, and it's dedicated to packaging in London. All of these reports follow the same objective. So the first one is to map material flows, in our case today, packaging flows in London, and calculate their associated emissions. And the second one is to identify hotspots, both in flows and emissions, to identify effective levers to support London's transition to a low carbon and circular economy. And the last one is to identify and quantify levers for impact in London. So this time we focused on packaging and plastic packaging. So global material use for packaging has significantly increased over the past decades, not just for plastic packaging, but also for other materials such as paper and to a lesser extent glass. Packaging is also a big contributor to London's waste stream. So it's estimated to represent over 15% of the total waste arising in London, taking into account all type of waste. And just for household and commercial waste streams, it's estimated to be around 30%. And we all know there is upcoming regulation in the UK around waste, and that will affect necessarily packaging and the packaging industry. So that's the case, obviously, of the EPR and DRS schemes, but also the UK emission trading schemes, simpler recycling, and many others. So for all of this reason, packaging is a key area of work at ReLondon. And we also wanted to better understand the impact of plastic packaging specifically through that work, because global plastic uses quadrupled over the past 3 decades, partly driven by the use of packaging. Packaging is the largest plastic application, and we know this is projected to further increase in the coming years. We've seen a lot of action from the industry to tackle plastic and plastic packaging. So that's the case, for example, globally with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Commitment, but also in the UK with the UK Plastic Pact that is led by WRAP. There is also a UN treaty being currently negotiated on plastic that will also focus on plastic packaging. So a lot of action, but we were really lacking London-specific data to understand packaging flows and plastic packaging flows in London, and also the contribution to plastic to packaging footprint. So for all of these reasons, we've conducted that study. We've commissioned Valpak and WRAP to conduct the analysis and engage with a number of partners along the way. So local authorities in London, the GLA, London councils, but also UKRI, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and waste management companies and packaging industry representatives have been really useful and really supportive with this work and had us get better data. We've also engaged with packaging innovators and many others. So this is really the outcome of a collaborative work. So I was meant to hand over to Zoe from Valpak here, but she had some tech issues, so not sure she's been able to connect. If you hear Zoe, give me a shout, otherwise I'll continue. So this study is mapping packaging flows in London. It's based on Valpak data downscale to London. In terms of scope, we've looked at all packaging materials, so paper, plastics, glass, metal, so aluminum and steel, and wood. The reference here was 2022. We've looked at both packaging that is used and disposed of by consumers. So it might be from retail, grocery shop, or takeaway packaging. And we've also looked at packaging that is used and disposed of by businesses and other institutions in London. So that might be retail, back of store packaging, construction packaging, commercial, and so on. And so we've really looked at all type of packaging that is placed on the market in London. And look at it from the moment it's placed on the market to end of life. So we looked at where it's disposed of, the collection stream, and then end of life treatment. For the emission, we've looked at embodied emission from packaging production and conversion to end of life, but I'll leave Billy from WRAP to give more detail on this later on. So one of the key findings of the study is that a staggering 2.2 million tons of packaging is consumed every year in London. Most of it is single-use packaging, and over 2 million tons of packaging are disposed of in London every year. A bit less than half of this, 45%, is used and disposed of by consumers, and the remaining 55% are used and disposed of by London businesses and institutions such as local government, hospitals, charities, and so on. In terms of materials, by weight, paper is the biggest contributor, 42%. That's very true for business packaging. So paper and wood are really important for business and transport packaging. But overall, it's 42%. Then comes glass, 21%, and 17% for plastic. This is by weight, not by unit. So that's why plastic might, the number for plastic might look surprising and maybe low. It's because it's a very light material. So as I said, the vast majority of packaging placed on the market in London is single use. So over 2 million tons of packaging are thrown away every year in London. To give you an idea of the scale, it's around 250 kilos per person per year. That includes, again, consumer and business packaging. But yeah, so 53% of consumer packaging is disposed of in household bins, but 70% is disposed of in public spaces, so bins on street, and 27% in the commercial waste stream. So what we highlighted also in the study is the contribution of visitors to London waste streams. So while they account for 30% of consumer packaging used in London, they account for 55% of packaging that is thrown away in on-street bins, and also in commercial waste stream. So on the right side, you can see the composition of the different waste streams per material. So a lot of business waste for packaging is paper and wood, and for the rest, for consumer packaging disposed at home and on street, you can see that the top contributor is glass by weight again, followed by paper and plastics. And finally, only 36% overall is recycled. So on the right side of the chart, you can see the recycling rate for packaging waste in London overall. So it's really low for plastic packaging, 12%. It's a bit higher, 32% for paper and 40% for glass. And metal is really high, both for aluminium and steel, mostly because a lot of packaging that might be disposed of in the metal packaging that might be disposed of in the residual waste stream gets recovered after incineration and is then recycled. And then on the left side of this chart, you can see the breakdown for household waste specifically and commercial waste. So for packaging in commercial waste, the recycling rate overall is 33%. You can see that's lower than for household waste, which is 44%. So that was also one of the key findings of this study. For both packaging in commercial waste and household waste, plastic has the lowest recycling rate, 5% for commercial and 21% for household waste. And you can see then paper and glass are around 40-50%, and metal again is very high. So I'm now going to hand over to Billy to share some insight about packaging footprint in London. Billy, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So WRAP supported Valpak in the project primarily by supplying a set of carbon conversion factors that could be applied to each of the different life cycle stages of the material flow analysis in order to express the packaging footprint as a greenhouse gas equivalent. We calculated these factors based on numbers that are published by DESNES and also numbers from the EcoInvent lifecycle database. And we built a set of factors with a scope that includes raw material extraction for those materials, the manufacture and distribution of empty packaging to the point of filling, and also waste management emissions from landfill, energy from waste, and sorting and preparation for recycling. The boundaries of the factors that we calculated excluded the packing and filling stage, and also product distribution emissions, use phase emissions, and emissions from the recycling process. The reason being that things like fill and product distribution emissions are allocated to the product, and the emissions from reprocessing, because it's a consumption-based footprint, are in most cases allocated to the next product, the product that uses the recycled material. Can I have the next slide, please? In terms of London's footprint, it comes out in carbon terms at just over 4.1 million tonnes of CO2 emissions. For context, that's slightly more than half of London's transport emissions. And of those emissions, about 3/4 of them are associated with the production stage of the packaging. So there's about 75–76% falls on production, which includes raw material extraction. Around 4% is transport on the packaging supply chain, and the remaining 20% or so is waste management emissions from energy from waste. If I can, which in terms of source, it effectively all really comes from plastics. If you can see the next slide, that breaks that down in a bit more detail by looking at plastic packaging. So the plastic packaging life cycle emissions are the biggest sort of contributor to London's packaging footprint, coming in at about 1.9 million tonnes, which is roughly equivalent to the London fashion footprint that was found in the fashion study. It's 46% in total of the footprint, which compares with 17% of the total weight put on the market, which you can see there that by weight, plastic is a very carbon intensive material. That's not to say that plastic is a carbon inefficient form of packaging. As Mal pointed out earlier, it is also very light. So in terms of the actual number of units that of packaging that plastic accounts for, it's disproportionately high relative to its weight. It's not especially carbon inefficient per packaging unit produced. We can see on the right hand side the source of these emissions. So it is actually the highest emitter in terms of the production emissions, but the other important element is energy from waste at end of life. Obviously, plastic is the material really with the lowest overall recycling rate, and it has a very high emission factor when sent to energy from waste. Let's see the next slide, please. I think I'm down to present on these as well. So we, as part of the study, we also looked at some levers for action, which overall we found on the high scenario that we looked at a high and medium impact scenario. And in the high scenario, we found a potential to reduce London's packaging footprint by up to 23%. And we looked at the three levers shown below, which are increasing the amount of recycled content in packaging and plastic packaging, reducing single-use packaging placed on the market, primarily through refill and reuse, and also the increased collection and recycling rates for packaging waste. If we can move on to the next slide. This shows a breakdown of how these were how these stack up relative to one another. It's probably worth pointing out in terms of how these were developed that they started by using London's 2022 baseline, and they use reductions that are based on the high impact scenarios that are considered in the PPWR, with a couple of additional modifications. These are discussed in full in the report, and they were based on sort of consultation with a consultation group as part of the project. We can see that increasing recycled content, which could be done via a range of initiatives. We've seen obviously the virgin plastics tax as a means of doing that, but also interventions to increase the availability of recycled polymers could have an impact there. This had the potential to, on its own, to decrease London's footprint by 7.8%. A reduction in single-use packaging either through packaging reuse or through things like loose sale and refill, where a customer might bring their own material, could result in another 5.8% reduction. And the biggest single potential lever was to increase the recycling rate by increasing collection rates and the effective recycling of materials at end of life. Next slide, please. Although I think that might be the last one for me. Yep.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Billy, and thanks, Mel. That I think yeah, some of those insights were surprising or really highlighted some of the things that we didn't necessarily expect. So, but yeah, hopefully it was interesting for you. Please don't hesitate to continue to put your questions on the Q&A. Ideally, really for us, it's easier if you put it in the Q&A section and not in the chat section. And we'll aim to answer them, along the way. I'm now gonna hand over to Nina from the GLA to get her perspective on some of the findings of the report and what we currently do in London in that aspect. Over to you, Nina.
Thanks, Pauline. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking at this webinar today to launch London's Packaging Footprint Report. Like many global cities, London faces significant environmental challenges due to the large amount of waste we produce. And that's why reducing plastic waste is an important priority for the Mayor of London. The Mayor wants London to become a zero waste city and believes that eliminating waste and driving up recycling is key in the transition to a low carbon circular economy. As you've heard this morning, the report shows London's packaging consumption is responsible for the emission of 4.1 million tonnes of CO2 per year, which is equivalent to, I believe, half of all transport emissions in the city. And plastic packaging alone is responsible for almost half of those emissions. So I think this really underscores the significant, yet sometimes overlooked climate impact of packaging. This report really highlights the importance of tackling London's packaging footprint and driving more circular approaches in the city. So the Mayor has already delivered a number of initiatives to help Londoners reduce the amount of plastic they use. So this has included his partnerships with Thames Water to install a network of 110 drinking fountains across the city. And this fountain network alone has already helped avoid the equivalent of almost 7 million half-litre single-use plastic bottles. And building on that initiative, the Mayor also worked with the Zoological Society of London on their #OneLess campaign, installing a further 28 drinking fountains. He has also worked with organisations like City to Sea to launch their global refill campaign here in London. And the Refill London campaign now provides more than 4,700 free water refill points across the city. So together, these initiatives have already been helping to reduce plastic waste, preventing millions of plastic bottles from entering the waste stream. In City Hall, we have already phased out single-use plastic items such as plastic bottles, cutlery, drink cups and straws, and the Mayor is continuing to work with the rest of the GLA group to reduce the unnecessary use of single-use products. And through ReLondon's business transformation team, the Mayor has also supported over 400 businesses in London to adopt and scale circular business models, including those that tackle single-use plastics. So while we've made some great progress, we do recognise that there is still a lot to do. The challenge of reducing plastic waste is complex, but with the recent publication of London's packaging footprint, we are now able to better understand how packaging material flows through the city and the environmental impact of packaging consumption here in London. The report highlights 3 key areas for action, which I think we mentioned already, but that includes increasing the use of recycled content in plastic packaging, reducing the use of single-use packaging, and increasing collection and recycling rates. As I mentioned, there are a number of initiatives the Mayor has already delivered, which are in line with these key areas for action, like refill and drinking fountains. The Mayor also works with boroughs and requires them to submit reduction and recycling plans, setting out how they are working to deliver on his London Environment Strategy commitments. So moving waste up the waste hierarchy, boosting recycling, minimising the environmental impact of their waste operations, and adopting circular practices in their local communities. So while there have been some delays with national government collection and packaging reforms like EPR and DRS, some aspects of these reforms have started and are expected to take further effect by 2025. And I think once fully implemented, these reforms can further support recycling targets and the key levers for action identified in the report. However, to make the changes needed to tackle packaging waste, everyone, including not only national and local governments, but communities and citizens, need to act. The report helpfully outlines some different scenarios, including some ambitious scenarios there, which would demand collaborative action from a number of stakeholders. So this would include government to sort of go further and implement policies and regulation to incentivize recycled content and promote reuse systems to help drive recycling rates. Businesses to invest in innovative packaging materials and designs and adopt circular economy principles. And then, of course, consumers to make conscious choices to reduce packaging consumption. So I think success therefore really hinges on collective and decisive action from all of these stakeholder groups, and them embracing the 3 key levers identified in the report. And working together, I think we can help significantly reduce London's packaging footprint. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nina. And yeah, great to hear you say that, collaboration is going to be the key, like to unlock some of those levers that are, quite ambitious and need collective action. This is great because now we're going to have a panel that brings together some innovators that are doing things on the ground with businesses and with like a councillor from a London borough. So yeah, it's really the good opportunity to start this discussion about what we can do next. I'm now going to hand over to Wayne, the ReLondon CEO, that is going to chair this panel. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Pauline. And if I could ask the panelists to turn their audio and their video on, at least for the time being. And yeah, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, we won't be monitoring the chat, so there's a chance they won't be answered. So do put them in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them as we go. I mean, clearly this report is part of a series of reports looking at specific materials within the London waste and material flow, and links back to some work that ReLondon did when we published our circular economy route back in 2017, which looked at key materials, fashion and textiles, food, the built environment, plastic as we called it then, and electricals. So we've kind of widened it out to plastic and packaging, which is the basis of this report. So I'm going to just go through some questions with the panel, and then at the end of that there will be hopefully some time for a Q&A. So yeah, my name is Wayne Hubbard. I'm the CEO of ReLondon, and I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves as we kind of go through the questions so that we can crack on. So the first question I'm going to ask, in fact, I'm going to introduce you, Julie. Julie, you're the Deputy Leader and Chair of the Environment, Sustainability, Culture and Sport Services Committee, I believe, at the London Borough of Richmond. So I'm going to quickly ask you to just give me your thoughts on this report and how it resonates with London boroughs.
Yeah, thank you. My portfolio very much on the environment sustainability side. These findings, I think they paint a picture of the scale of London's collective consumption and how much that contributes to our city's collective emissions. It makes that clear link, doesn't it, between lifestyles, consumption and the emissions, not just what we consume, but how it's wrapped and transported, where we get it from and how we dispose of it. It's a great report, lots of data. The data is really important, and I think what we do with the data is even more so. And we need to share the insights and engage with residents and local businesses on why it matters and how we can work together to make changes to what we do. We can look at what we already do. There's some great work going on, and what works we need to identify what works and how we scale that up for a greater impact. So reuse and refill projects, for example, they need to be a default and not seen as a sort of quirky option just for some people. I think we do have an emotional resonance as well that we can tap into. If plastic has a value as a resource and we put in place systems that accommodate that, then we'll see less plastic and packaging littering the streets and parks and rivers. And that's really important to people. And if we can make the links between those very visible impacts on wildlife and things like that people care about, and we can link it to emissions and climate change, you know, that will require a lot of work. I think my point is that environmental concerns are already really important to people, and there's a collective will to galvanize if we know what action we need to take. There's a financial resonance, of course. Transporting and disposing of waste is expensive. The desirability of spending less on disposing of material that could have been reused or eliminated from systems is really attractive to boroughs. And I think collectively at a local government level, we need to create and support opportunities for residents and businesses to do things differently, to use less plastic, to reuse, to refill. We need to look at our own procurement practices to show best practice in working with our suppliers and our contractors, reduce our organisational consumptions. We need to look at our local recycling systems and identify the challenges and opportunities to inform decisions, and the data is really helpful on that. And we need to get together and use our collective expertise to lobby for the national regulatory changes that I think are probably needed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really comprehensive response. And of course, there are those 3 levers for action that we've identified, which are really common sense levers, but it takes the data to kind of help you to say, yes, those common sense levers are not anecdotal, they're actually the right levers. So that's, you know, increased recycling content within packaging, then more reuse of packaging, crucially, because most of those emissions associated with packaging are created before we even get to the end user. So I know that Richmond is leading on the One World Living programme, which is a programme under London Council's climate programmes, and you're leading on the plastics working group. So can you tell me what projects you've been working on and what you think is needed for London's for a London-wide transition on packaging?
Yes, so one of the things we've been looking at is engaging with schools and young people for whom environmental issues are really important. We've been getting students engaged in reducing demand for plastics, thinking about how you can do that, how you can avoid unnecessary plastic consumptions. And I'm very aware that Lizzie is on this call and she's been involved in a lot of that with the borough and will no doubt say more from her point of view. Another thing that's important is the plastics pledge for London boroughs, so that we can work on eliminating plastics from all council operations, which cover a huge number of areas. And this, you know, it's easy to say, isn't it? But it does require an understanding of what boroughs are already doing, what barriers they face, identifying what the baseline use is, engaging suppliers and contractors to support them shifting away from plastic as well. So it's important to have an agreed methodology around these things so everyone has clear steps to take, and hopefully that will make it simpler for boroughs to reduce plastic use and to progress towards climate targets as well, because these things are so closely linked. We've been exploring projects to trial reusable cups and takeaway packaging schemes, working with people really embedded in communities, local event organisers and others who really know how things work. It's easy to sort of decide things on high, but we really need to work with people who are actually involved in communities as well, so they can carry on doing nice things and running their businesses and all of that's important, but to do it in a better way. And then I think the London-wide angle is really important as well. I think we do need policy shift. We need grant funding to enable us to do more stuff on this. Together, we've obviously got a far stronger voice. And I think also really important to look at how the business sector works with us as well, to embed things in the way we all carry out our businesses. A lot of words like coordinated and collective. I do think it's really important that well, just as we've come here today all together from different organisations, that we need to work together. So hopefully that's what we'll continue to do.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, and we've got Lizzie with us today, who can actually talk about refill and Pupils Profit. Lizzie's the founder of Pupils Profit, and you've been working with several boroughs in London to shift behaviour on reuse and refill. So I wondered if you could just quickly share some more details about what you've been doing and learnings from working in collaboration with local authorities in London and actually beyond London, I think.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. We've been working with schools, mainly primary schools, but also secondary schools and some SEN schools, setting up child-led school-based refill shops. And in this process, the children learn about running a business, they write business plans and apply for job roles, but they go on to operate a regular, fully circular refill shop, which sells eco-friendly products to the wider school community of parents, carers and staff. And I think, you know, this is really, really valuable. The products they're selling are affordable. So they range from, we standardize it actually at sort of 500 ml containers that are refilled because it keeps their pricing simpler, and it keeps collecting in empty containers that are donated sometimes in case people forget them. We suggest 500 ml because it just keeps everything simpler. So prices range from £1.50 to £2.75 for eco-friendly washing up, liquid body wash, hair care, etc. So we have three key outputs from this. We look at the number of containers saved from waste, which is really important from the children's point of view. And then we look at the behaviour change, and that's just really incredible, actually. We see at the beginning, of course, we ask the community, do they want to have a refill shop? And consistently, the community will say yes, sort of 95% yes rate, that they say they want a refill shop. So I think we can take from that, they think it's a good idea. And then we go back in once the shop's been running for a little while and we say, okay, you know, have you shopped? If you've shopped, has the shop helped you to refill more often? And the yes, it's helped rate is about 83%, which, you know, that's behaviour change. And what we then look at is what are the reasons behind that? And you know, a lot of people would probably think, oh, well, it's children involved, it's sweet. It's actually convenience. These primary school families, parents, carers, staff are really busy people. And what we get back on those surveys is, you know, it's where I am. It's great having it as part of the school run. So this is a really important thing in everything that we do going forward, is that the levers are convenience, affordability, they're crucial. And so that's really interesting. And then the other thing that we look at is building skills. We build, obviously, the children's transferable skills. We focus on teamwork, problem solving, creativity and leadership, which are all important in the green economy and everywhere else. It's been picked up by Ofsted, which is great for the schools because it sort of validates their time spent making this happen. And schools have also got climate action plans coming into play in January 2025, and it aligns with 3 of the 4 pillars there. So through all of this, we're working towards everyone in that kind of replicable community in Richmond and across London, getting into the habit of loving the contents rather than the container that they own for such a tiny amount of time. And the other thing about it is I just think that, you know, it reminds everyone that refill exists. I remember, you know, a long time ago, refill existing. It exists in some places, but it doesn't exist in all places. So, you know, it's a useful reminder from that point of view.
Thanks, Lizzie. I mean, I was going to ask you how you feel this resonates with the audience, but I feel you've kind of addressed that. Was there anything else you wanted to say more about the particular, you know, the kids, really, I suppose?
Yes, no, the children. You know, as Nina was saying, you know, they take the visible impact of plastic and its impact on turtles very seriously, and their whole life have grown up with climate change being talked about in their education, on the media, on social media. It is a thing for them, and they have very little practical action that they can take. So, giving them a business that they're in charge of is tremendously exciting as a kind of entity, but actually they want to make a difference, and that's fantastic. And it's not just you know, visible plastic containers. They know about microplastics entering the food chain, so it matters to them. And I think, you know, we obviously kind of wrap it up in a circular business model, and they get involved in sending bulk containers back to the manufacturers as well. So that's all very positive. But I think, you know, the children get it, and I think the parent community are very positive. And okay, not everyone is refilling, but what you do have is a desire to do better that is unlocked by this refill shop, and it's a very positive experience. And I think, you know, much more so than perhaps plastic manufacturers and supermarkets would like us to believe, you know, people do want to do better. And this is just a sort of, I think now, an opportunity to look at how can we do that? Can we standardize packaging and, you know, have an easier way of reusing? And it's obviously more complex than carrier bags, but we made great progress there. And now it feels like a time when we can harness children's enthusiasm and you know, everything, just replicate it. I think, you know, there's room. One of the meetings I attended earlier this week was around Eat Like a Londoner, and the campaign around that is fantastic. And I think if we can get to a point where we've got enough things aligned that we can kind of run a reuse campaign, and, you know, into that educating on, you know, through the keyhole on plastic, and actually figuring out that these emissions are also bad. It's not just the landfill far away there. But yes.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. I mean, okay, so we kind of, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but, you know, within the work that we do, we know that, you know, in order to get people to recycle more, they need to have knowledge, they need to be motivated, and it's got to be easy, right? Knowledge, motivation, and ease. And you've kind of deal with quite a few, you know, all of those in a way. So that's really interesting. But Tom, I'm going to come on to you. Tom, you're strategy director at Recora, and you provide waste management services to businesses and local authorities in London. But this research shows that only 33% of packaging waste in London is currently recycled. So we're kind of getting on to, you know, those factors. So what do you think might explain this? And from your perspective, what's needed to boost packaging recycling rates in London? You're on mute, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, great. Okay, yeah, so thanks, Wayne. It's Recora as a commercial waste company, so we can really talk about the commercial side of things. We haven't historically tracked recycling rates for packaging specifically, although will have to do that going forward. I'd like to think from our customer base, the packaging recycling would be higher than the report, but the key for that is we have very motivated customers, and that's the key kind of thing, is that you need high levels of motivation, good staff training, and good infrastructure. The bin infrastructure, in the kind of, that's like a hackneyed phrase, but get the bins right. And then you do get much better recycling rates. We did a very interesting study with the team from University of Sheffield Behaviour Change team and the environmental charity Hubbub in 3 London offices last year, where we turbocharged the engagement. You know, we had propaganda going all around the offices. We did special labelling things on packaging, and we got really good results. It really made a difference when you give people information. We and get people motivated and have the office well organised for things to happen. We're also a big fan of source separation. We do tend to get better results where you have particularly paper and card bins separate. You do get better results when you have, mixed recycling. You need it in some places, but you do get better results if you split things up a little bit. Next year, we have simpler recycling that's coming in from the legislation, which is going to at least mean that everyone everywhere in the country is doing the same thing everywhere. And that should help, because a lot of confusion about you do this at home, this in this borough, this in this town, actually all doing the same thing. That's going to be good. It's also, the report talks about plastics, and it's worth saying a couple of things about the complexities of plastics recycling. Particularly when you get beyond bottles, plastic recycling is tough and it's quite expensive to do. And it makes plastic recyclers, it's quite tough to compete with virgin producers when the oil price is low, which it is now. So plastic recyclers at the moment are all kind of losing money. And a lot of investment is needed to get the number of plants we need to get the recyclable plastic waste we produce in the UK at the moment. And there's one industry report says we need 40 plants. It's £1 billion is needed to do that, and that's not going to happen without government intervention. Billy mentioned there is already the plastics tax, which is about £200 now. The industry thinks you need about £500 plastics tax. It's got to be quite a lot higher. In order to get people to be confident to invest in the infrastructure which will drive the recycling that we need. And that's really essential to have that, because otherwise we can, we and the other kind of waste companies, we can collect, and the householders and the businesses, they can collect all the plastic they want, but if there's not a home for it to go to, then you will not get the plastics recycling driven up. So it's really important that we all work together with the government to kind of get the infrastructure in place. The last thing I'd say very quickly on take back, food in recycling is a bit the enemy of recycling. It downgrades the quality of what you collect. So take back schemes for takeaways, particularly, we know that's really good, because the kind of enemy of recycling is a cardboard carton half full of noodles fixed in with a mixed recycling. That downgrades the quality of what you collect. So take back schemes which deal with that absolutely is the right way to go. So that's kind of my thoughts, Wayne. Back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was very comprehensive. I really appreciate that. Okay. Last but not least, I'm going to come to Ben. Ben Patton, you're the founder of Dizzy, which is a business-to-business reusable packaging service for brands and retailers. I wonder if you could just give us a bit more detail on your solution and share your reflections, I guess, on what's needed to scale up reuse in London and beyond.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, just a few things, I guess, just to sort of set the scene a little bit. Yeah, I mean, reuse is really important. It can provide lower impact packaging, lower cost packaging, and also reduce infrastructure costs. So I think sometimes the benefits of reuse get lost, and the potential for reuse gets lost in it, because it is quite a big challenge to scale reuse. So thinking about the ultimate goal and what we can ultimately achieve sometimes gets lost. But the report shows the kind of scale of the packaging waste problem, and to a degree the cost, and obviously there's a financial and an impact, albeit a direct one, on our communities. And I think it is vital that we have some incentives for change, but I'll come on to that a little bit. But yeah, just to explain what we do. So we provide what's called pre-fill. So we provide product in packaging already packaged. We've started off mainly in dry and ambient goods, but looking at a number of other categories. We've kind of started where, from a technical perspective, it's a little easier, but looking at the categories and products where we'd have the highest impact. And I guess what we provide is the packaging, the operations, and technology, digital tracking to help manage this inventory of packaging. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is provide a pool of packaging in the same way that other companies might provide, say, a pool of pallets or a pool of secondary packaging, to be there for brands or retailers to draw on a pool of packaging to make it as affordable as possible. Because that's the challenge, really. How are you going to make it the same cost as single-use packaging? And I guess there are a number of preconditions for scalability, and that's probably the next place to go. So for us, I guess there's a flywheel that we're trying to start. So we want retailers and brands to adopt reusable packaging. I think for that, we need better economics and impact, and we probably need policy that supports reuse to get there. So we kind of need to simultaneously get more brands and retailers to adopt reusable packaging, which will in turn improve the economics and impact and give policymakers more confidence to support reuse. And what we look at is the structural challenge, because this is systemic change. So you have a lot of incumbent interests, and you need to find ways to fit kind of existing players into a new system. And it's totally possible, but you sort of need to, the way we think about it anyway, is a sort of top-down approach where you're thinking about a clear signal of intent from larger retailers, where they've got a big degree of commitment and funding that they're bringing to it. And then bottom up, where you've got smaller players, specialists, trials, where you're proving the economics, building some demand, developing the operations and showing some capacity. Obviously, though, that bottom up has low volume. Everything you do might not be transferable to a sort of systemic change. But the problems with top down is it's very hard to create that total across industry commitment to change. So you somehow need to bring both together and think practically about how you join both top down and bottom up efforts. But I think just to kind of dial out a little bit, we should think about these things as opportunities. There's, we know that there's a problem we ultimately need to solve. So we should think about the reuse economy as something we can develop in London. And it's a vital part of future economies, businesses we can develop to support it, and ultimately propositions and expertise that we can export. So we should see this as a positive part of building a future economy. And I think it's, that there's a big opportunity. I think London can play a great role as well in setting that flywheel going. I think what we'd definitely be interested in talking more about is finding ways to develop area trials where we can see some level of scale of reuse and the infrastructure to support it. So yeah, a quick intro from us. Thank you.
That was really good, really useful, and a lot of the issues that have kind of been touched upon in the Q&A were really neatly summed up in that final response point. I'm going to ask in the last few minutes, looking at the Q&A, a lot of the stuff's been answered. I see Bruce Bratley has asked a question about recycling and the collection of recycling. I guess, Bruce, if it's the Bruce, I think it is his first mile, right? So, this is that change from what is the solution in quotes now, which is the mass collection of packaging as a waste material, right? So where it's a waste management solution, to moving towards a solution which is reusable, which is refill. And that difficult transition from one to another, which will be both disruptive, difficult from a logistics perspective, have possibly unintended consequences that we don't know about, but nevertheless is necessary existentially in order to move our society from a disposal society to a circular economy, from a linear economy to a circular economy. So these things are very much kind of existential and systemic problems, deeply important and relevant. And the Deputy Mayor on Monday at our launch event, talking about the circular economy, regarded the people there as the future, representing the future of London's economy. So given that kind of global existential challenge, I just want to ask you in turn, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but what is your kind of one thing that you would like to see from the government's task force, which they've announced on circular economy? What do you think would be the single most biggest lever they could pull that would help you currently? I'm going to start with Lizzie, then go on to Julia, then Tom, and then Ben. So Lizzie, sorry to spring that on you.
No, Ben touched on it actually. I think to start with, there has to be an affordability issue that is addressed, because undoubtedly, you are up against the discount retailers selling the same products at incredibly cheap, and there's a cost of living issue. And so I think for a certain amount of time, there is a requirement for subsidy to come in and help where reuse is not unaffordable, but it is unaffordable for some. So, looking at that would be my ask.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, very reasonable ask indeed. Julia, can I ask you the same question?
Okay, so this is a classic response from local government pleading with national government to do the things that we can't. And I think it's the economic levers that we need to see to pivot packaging producers towards reuse of material rather than virgin material. We have that a little bit in, plastic tax and the proportion of recycled material in your packaging to benefit from that. I think should be strengthened, but also that point that one of my fellow speakers made about the price of oil being attractive, and we need to sort that out. I've left it a bit vague because I'm not a tax or economics expert, but from my perspective, that's what national government needs to be looking at.
Yeah, quite right too. And it's interesting that the Treasury should be part of this, broader task force consideration, and I think there will be a part of that from what I understand. Same question. So who did I say was next? I can't remember now. I'm gonna go Tom and then Ben. So sorry if I got that in a different order.
Okay, so we have extended producer responsibilities, so the polluter pays principle.
Oh, that must have been Margaret Bates who pulled the plug on you there. As you mentioned EPR. So I'm going to go to you, Ben.
Well, that's well, actually, I was going to talk about EPR, so I promise I didn't pull him. Yeah, I mean, EPR is very important, I think, for starting to level the playing field, and that polluter pays principle is vital. Some concerning reports in the press last weekend about the government's commitment to EPR. I think we could do with some clarity on that. I think they need to have confidence in the long-term outcomes there. We just need to incentivize those that can control the packaging outcomes to actually create more efficient packaging, lower waste, and also to give some form of advantage to reuse. I mean, we would like to see a form of exemption from EPR fees for reusable packaging. We need to see some sort of stimulation. It's very small scale at this stage. So I think to see, some equivalent to the sort of feed-in tariff, where a new solution has an advantage at the outset, would be really important to kind of sparking things off, catalyzing the reuse industry.
Great, amazing, fantastic, really high quality responses from a stellar panel. Really very much want to thank you. I'm gonna hand back to Pauline just to sum up and say goodbye. But yeah, thank you very much, panel, and thanks for participating today.
Thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists. Big thank you to Nina for bringing the GLA perspective on this, and also a very, very big thank you to Valpak and WRAP. That it has been a very strong collaboration to bring this. So for all the attendees, two things. First, have a look at the report. There are much more details and very interesting insights in there. So please have a look at it. And second, if you're interested to help us boost recycling and reuse in London, just reach out. We're happy to hear any idea and collaborate with anyone really. So thanks again for joining, and see you soon.